So F124 has just been released, and today I'm going to walk you through the new setup page and the new setup changes that we're allowed to make this year. And I'll show you guys the baseline setups that I like to run in my league racing and esports races.
This video is brought to you by Next Level Racing. The FGT Elite Series cockpit is designed to allow you to be in true racing positions for both Formula and GT racing. Its rigidity and adjustability offers a versatile experience for all racers, and the flex-free NLR seat slider enables racers to find their desired racing position. The rig is compatible with a wide range of wheels, pedals, shifters and handbrakes. The Elite Series can also be paired with the NLR Motion Plus platform to provide an even more immersive experience. Combining top-notch materials, extensive adjustability and compatibility, the FGT Elite Series delivers an unmatched, immersive simulation experience.
So, as we enter the setup menu, you see it's very similar to last year's game, not much difference, until we start to go into the few changes later on in suspension especially. So for the wings, it looks like this is the time trial setup for Silverstone that I just pulled up. So I'm going to walk you through it and kind of see what changes I would make personally to a setup. As I can see here, we have a 17 wing up already, which is already very high from what I know, and means the car is going to be very oversteery, which I actually really like. So I would keep it, maybe not necessarily these wings, but I would keep the wing up relatively similar. We jump onto transmission now, and this is one of the main changes of this year's game. The on-throttle diff, the off-throttle diff, and the engine braking. We can now lower it all the way down to 10%, which I don't know how much different it's going to feel to last year, but I think it's going to be way more pointy. When you're on the throttle, the car will just rotate a bit more, which I feel like we've always missed a bit of exit rotation, or exit rotation. So I think lowering it this year will be quicker and just gonna feel better for myself, honestly. I don't see myself going too far up, maybe not more than 40% to be honest. I haven't tested it too much, of course, the game just came out, so but yeah, I'm just going off of my idea and what I'm used to doing. Off throttle, I'm always going to the minimum possible. I think the last few F1 games I've always run the minimum, if not minimum, 1 click or 2. But never more than that. If I do run a few clicks, it's just because for the race to keep the car a bit more stable and save the tires a little bit more. Engine braking, one of the main new features of this game. The higher engine braking you have, the more rotation you get off throttle and into the brake, to the entry of the corner. So ideally, I think we will have this relatively high, probably maximum for qualifying at least. Maybe in the race we will lower it a bit, just to keep the car a bit more stable and save the tires as well. So yeah, I would just go above towards the highest settings possible. Suspension geometry, we've been used to not changing much the last few years. As you can see here though, we are running fully maximum camber and minimum toes, so kind of the opposite of last year. I don't know too much how in this game it changes, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference because it never has in the F1 game. It feels a little bit different, and the feeling of the car, but in terms of lap time, I've always felt like it doesn't affect it too much. So I guess just play around with it a little bit and see what feels best to you. Suspension page, another main change this year is the ride heights. As you can see, we can now change between values of 10 to 40 on the front and 40 to 100 on the rear, so huge changes. I'm not too sure how high the car will be at 100 rear ride height. That's something that I'm gonna test, but let's just start off with the suspension. It's always gonna be a very stiff car, just the way that the regulations of this model work. Just a stiffer suspension is better and faster for this type of Formula 1 car in this era. Rear suspension is always going to be a little bit lower because you need that, that looseness on the rear. It's going to be very similar to F123. If you've done league racing or sorts like that, you will know that 41 front suspension is king, and rear suspension, you can always play around with it in terms of how you like it. Higher speed tracks, higher speed corners, tracks like Silverstone, I would go with a higher rear suspension, of course, because you just need that high speed stability. But tracks like, for example, maybe Baku, where you have a lot of slow speed corners and exits and traction zones, I would lower the rear suspension by quite a bit. In terms of roll bar, kind of same thing as suspension. I mean, the higher speed corners you have, the higher roll bar you would like to have, because you need a stiff car and stable car. So same thing for the suspension. I would increase it for Silverstone and lower it for a track like Baku. Now, yeah, onto the ride height. Here it's mostly dependent on how bumpy the track is, to be honest. I mean, if you're bottoming out the whole straight, there's no point running a lower ride height. You're just losing way too much time on the straights. So I think since some tracks have been newly laser scanned on this game, we're gonna have to check out how bumpy some tracks have gotten, because I've seen that Silverstone got quite a bit bumpier than usual, and we used to run very low ride heights in Silverstone because the track was always very flat, and we just never had any issues with bottoming, and we didn't lose the car on the high speeds. But if we do bottom out now, we're gonna have to increase a little bit the front ride height especially. The rear ride height I think is more of a tool for yourself to see what balance of the car you like. So if you want more rotation on the slow speed corners, you need to increase that rear ride height, create a bigger rake in the car. So the higher the back of the car is, the more rotation you have on the slow speed, but also more stability you have on the high speed corners. So in a track like Silverstone, it would make sense to run a little bit higher rear ride height and get that stability in the high speed corners and rotation in the slow speed. But obviously in a track like, again, Baku, I think lowering the rear ride height to almost minimum would probably be the fastest way around that track with all those traction zones. And now we move on to the brakes. For the last few years, I think it's been quite a bit of 100% brake pressure, kind of everywhere. But I've seen that in this game, you lock up a lot more. It's very easy to lock your tires, your fronts, your rears, both. So I think you will be able to run a little bit lower, but I wouldn't go below like 93, 95% brake pressure, because the fastest way around the track is it's just better to have that higher brake pressure and just brake in a shorter distance. So I would probably stay on 100 for qualifying, because you don't really need to save the tires. And maybe you can lower it a little bit for the race if you have a longer stint coming up. And brake bias, again, just a tool for yourself to adjust the balance of the car into a braking zone. But remember what I said about the rake and the ride height. If you have a bigger rake and a higher rear ride height, you probably need a higher brake bias as well, just to keep that front stable on the entry, and vice versa. If you have a low ride height, you can probably get away with a lower brake bias. Now we're running into the tire pressures page, and I see it's changed a lot because you can now increase way more the PSI. We're going all the way up to 29.5 and 26.5 on the rear. It looks like the fastest way for now is to put the tire pressures on maximum, because I've seen that getting the tires up to temperatures is very, very hard in this game. So the easier you can keep the tire, or the more you can keep the tires in that window, the faster you get. So in theory, it should be faster to lower the tire pressures, especially maybe in tracks like Qatar, where you have a lot of high-speed corners and the fronts are very, very warm. So you probably will need to lower them for Qatar. Otherwise, if tracks like, again, lower speed tracks like Baku, you probably need to up them, because you just can't really get any tire temperature in the tires with slow speed corners. So yeah, this is the type of setup that I would be running in my league racing. It's going to be very oversteery for many of you guys, but I think it just depends on how you drive. You can also get away with understeer. I know my teammate Barry also, he runs very understeery setup, so very different to mine actually, and he's just as fast, if not quicker. So you just really have to take some time out of your day and learn how to make a setup that suits your driving style, and you will end up quicker. And who knows, maybe you'll end up in esports just like us. If there's any other questions that you guys might have, let us know down in the comment section below, and we'll make sure to answer as many of them as we can.